The Gilded Age was from 1865 to 1890, and it's the only era in U.S. history that's named sarcastically because on the inside, Americans were really poor and there was a lot of government corruption, but on the outside, it seemed like really rich and prosperous. Um, and during this period, there was a lot of contrast between extremely wealthy people and extremely poor people, but it was an important transitory area in the growth of America. So the two main causes of the Gilded Age were the Second Industrial Revolution and immigration. And the Second Industrial Revolution was mainly powered by steel. The Bessemer process helped mass produce steel, and it was a really cheap method of doing so. And it helped create railroads and buildings. And the Transcontinental Railroad stimulated the steel industry and vice versa. The Transcontinental Railroad connected the two coasts of America, and it allowed for products to be distributed all over the country. And this helped factories, and a lot of people got jobs in the factories or creating the railroad. And cities emerged where the railroads converged, and these were called hub cities, and the main one was Chicago. And a lot of jobs were created for immigrants. By 1880, 2.5% of people living in America had railroad jobs. Another thing in the Second Industrial Revolution were automobiles. Automobiles, and they greatly increased oil demand after kerosene was outdated. Thomas Edison created electricity, which allowed for longer working days in factories with machines. Another thing that caused the Gilded Age was immigration, and at this time mainly Chinese and Irish immigrants were coming in, and businesses like this because since they really wanted to work, they could employ them for really low wages. Robber barons are American businessmen who became notorious in the way that they retrieved their money. Jay Gould and William H. Vanderbilt were railroad robber barons. They used a method called stock watering when they would sell bonds and stocks for much more than they're actually worth. And they also bribed journalists and politicians who would challenge their corrupt practices, and they would give them free rides on the railroad, and they engaged in secret rebates. Andrew Carnegie started out poor with poor parents, but he worked up to eventually producing 1/4 of the steel made in America. And he partnered with Henry Clay Frick, who was against unions, and he used vertical integration. And he was a philanthropist in that he gave away a lot of money to libraries and universities. Eventually, J.P. Morgan comes along and buys out Andrew Carnegie for $400 million. And in 1901, he creates the United States Steel Corporation, America's first billion-dollar organization. John D. Rockefeller organized the Standard Oil Company and was in control of 95% of all oil refineries in America by 1877. And he engaged in secret rebates, hired spies. He used horizontal integration, which basically made him a monopoly, the Standard Oil Company, and he perfected the use of trusts. But he donated a lot of money to religious organizations. So vertical integration allowed every part of the manufacturing process to be combined into one organization. This was a good way to be a big company with a lot of help and cooperation without being a monopoly, and this is what Andrew Carnegie used. But John D. Rockefeller used horizontal integration, where he would buy out other competitors to form a monopoly. From this corruption came at least four things. The first being the Interstate Commerce Act of 1887, which banned rebates and pools in the railroad industry and made railroad companies make their rates public. The um, the ICC was basically in charge of the whole railroad system shown in this cartoon. And debate arose over the contributions of money that the robber barons would make, questioning whether it was right to donate dirty money or if they were only donating the money for their own reputation. The first labor unions came about, like the Knights of Labor, who pressed for an 8-hour workday. And the Gilded Age was followed by the Progressive Era, which had muckrakers like Ida Tarbell writing about the corrupt practices of robber barons, and this led to laws being passed like the Sherman Antitrust Act.